The Hollow Sky facility. The first thing I noticed was the soft pulsing of the generators. The air felt dry and carried a faint smell of ozone, while the overhead lights hummed with a rhythm that reminded me of cicadas. Arranged before me were several monitoring stations with switches, dials, and displays showing all sorts of metrics I couldn't yet interpret. This was it, I thought. My first day as operations director at Blackridge Wind Farm. I adjusted my glasses, feeling strangely out of place. The facility was nestled in the remote highlands of Scotland. Isolated, yes, but there was something else. I tried to dismiss the sense of foreboding that had crept into my thoughts since I first set foot in this place. Time to focus on the job. Someone approached from behind. It was Diana Winters, an elderly woman with piercing blue eyes who moved with deliberate slowness, as if weighed down by knowledge rather than years. For just a moment I thought I saw something like dread in her expression, or perhaps acceptance. She cleared her throat. "Nathan Hayes, welcome to Blackridge." "Thanks, Diana," I said, extending my hand. She shook it, though reluctantly. "I appreciate you showing me around the operation." She let out a short laugh. "Operation, yes. There's certainly more to it than meets the eye." She glanced at the monitors as if they were somehow connected to her cryptic statement. I frowned. "What do you mean by that?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved past me, her fingers briefly touching one of the control panels as she walked. "You'll discover it," she finally said. "Eventually you'll discover it all. Diana, if there's something I should be aware of, I'd rather you just tell me. I'm here to do a job and I'd like to do it properly." She paused. "You're observant, Hayes. That's good. You'll need to be." She turned to face me. "Just keep your wits about you and question what you observe." I started to ask for clarification, but she raised her hand to stop me. "That's all I'm going to say. You'll either figure it out or you won't." She began walking away, then stopped and turned back. "Wait," I said. "What about the farm's operations? Anything unusual I should know about?" Diana halted. "Unusual?" She laughed again, this time with an edge to it. "The entire facility is unusual. You know, it doesn't even supply energy to the national grid." I nodded. "I read the reports. All output goes to Project Aegis." She grimaced. "Yes, Project Aegis. You can ask about that, but don't expect any answers." She left before I could respond, leaving me alone in the control center. I looked back at the monitors with their flashing numbers and graphs that made little sense to me yet. The output was significantly larger than what should be possible for a wind farm of this size, yet none of it was powering the homes and businesses in the nearby village. It all went to Project Aegis. I leaned against the console. Something felt wrong here, I could sense it, but that wasn't important right now. All that mattered was that I did my job, and if there were answers to be found, I would find them. A week had passed since Diana's enigmatic warning, and her words had taken root in my mind, growing like thorns. I tried to concentrate, focus on the job, monitoring the farm's operations, ensuring the figures aligned, keeping everything running smoothly, but the tension in the atmosphere was impossible to ignore. The canteen was equally strange. I stepped inside, the aroma of stale tea hitting me immediately. The ceiling lights flickered intermittently, their harsh glow casting elongated shadows across the room's stark white walls. A medium-sized table occupied the center, littered with empty cups and wadded-up serviettes. A vending machine in the corner hummed steadily, its display blinking sporadically. Michael Fletcher sat at the table, his thin shoulders hunched forward. He wasn't eating or drinking, just gazing at the wall opposite him. His vacant, dull eyes didn't even register my entrance. "Morning, Mike," I said, grabbing a mug from the counter. He didn't respond. I busied myself with pouring tea, the bitter liquid steaming as it filled the cup. The sound of the kettle settling back onto its base seemed unnaturally loud in the silent room. "You all right?" I asked, turning to face him. For a moment I thought he hadn't heard me. Then, slowly he turned his head. His eyes met mine, but there was no recognition in them, no sign of awareness. "Fine," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I waited for him to continue, but he didn't. He just turned back to the wall, his gaze distant and unfocused. I took a sip of the tea, wincing at the terrible taste, and turned my attention to the other side of the room. Sarah Blackwood sat at a small desk by the window, her posture rigid and her fingers moving rapidly over the keyboard of her laptop. "Sarah?" I called out, hoping for a more normal interaction. She didn't look up. "Sarah?" I said again, louder this time. "Yes," she replied, her tone indicating I was an intrusion. "Just checking in. Everything all right?" "Everything is satisfactory," she said without pausing her typing. "Reports are on schedule. No anomalies to report." "That's good to hear," I responded. She didn't acknowledge me, her attention completely on the screen before her. The knot in my stomach tightened. I glanced back at Mike, still staring at the wall, then at Sarah, who hadn't even blinked since I'd entered the room. "Right," I muttered under my breath, setting the mug down on the counter. "Guess I'll leave you to it." Neither of them acknowledged me as I left. The inspection route took me through the facility's main corridors, the faint vibration of machinery resonating through the walls. I tried to concentrate on the task at hand, checking readings and recording measurements, but my thoughts kept returning to the canteen. Mike staring blankly at nothing, Sarah typing like an automaton, the way their voices had sounded hollow, lifeless. I shook my head, trying to push the uneasiness aside. Maybe it was just the stress of the job, long hours, repetitive tasks. It could affect anyone. But as I rounded the corner to the loading bay, I stopped in my tracks. Two armored green trucks were parked just outside the bay doors, their engines running. The vehicles were streamlined and unmarked, their dark windows reflecting the harsh overhead lights. A group of individuals in tactical gear stood nearby, their faces obscured by helmets and visors. I ducked back behind the corner, my heart racing. What the hell was this? I peered around the edge of the wall, watching as the personnel moved with practiced efficiency, unloading large metal containers from the trucks. Each container was marked with a bold blue label, "Restricted." The workers on the bay floor, Blackridge employees, stood by silently, their expressions blank. None of them spoke, none of them questioned. They just moved the containers onto motorized trolleys and wheeled them toward the freight elevator at the far end of the bay. The elevator doors opened, revealing two more individuals in tactical gear. They gestured toward the containers, their movements sharp and authoritative. The workers complied without hesitation, loading the containers inside. I stepped back, pressing my hand against the cool metal wall, my breathing feeling too loud, too rapid. "Nathan." The voice behind me made me jump. I turned to see Lisa Chin, her slender frame leaning casually against the opposite wall. Her dark eyes darted toward the loading bay, then back to me. "Didn't take you for the curious type," she said, her tone light but her expression serious. "What's happening out there?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Lisa shrugged. "Deliveries for Project Aegis." "What's in the containers?" Don't know, she said, though the way her eyes shifted told me she wasn't being entirely truthful. Best not to ask. That's not much of an answer. It's the only one you're going to get, she said, pushing away from the wall and straightening her posture. Word of advice, don't linger here too long. Bennett doesn't like people sticking their noses where they don't belong. Bennett? Lisa nodded toward the trucks. He's the one in charge. If you're smart, you'll stay out of his way. I opened my mouth to press her further, but the sound of the freight elevator doors closing cut me off. I turned back toward the loading bay just in time to see the personnel in tactical gear stepping inside the elevator. The doors slid shut with a heavy thud, and the faint hum of the machinery signaled their descent to Project Aegis. Lisa patted me on the shoulder. Let it go, Hayes. You don't want to end up like the others. I looked at her sharply. The others? But she was already walking away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the now empty loading bay. The trucks were gone, the workers had dispersed, and the only sound was the distant humming of the wind turbines. Diana's warning replayed in my mind. Underscore, don't dig too deep under. But it was too late for that. I was already in over my head. The now familiar soft sounds of machinery filled the office as I sat at my desk, staring at the monitor. Numbers scrolled across the screen, perfectly aligned, perfectly normal, but the normality felt like a facade hiding something far more sinister beneath. The events of the past week weighed heavily on my mind. Diana's cryptic warning, the lifeless stares of Mike and Sarah, the unmarked trucks, the containers marked restricted. No matter how much I tried to focus on my work, it all kept circling back to Project Aegis. What the hell was this place, and why was it such a secret that no one knew, or was willing to talk about, anything? The sharp ring of the desk phone shattered the silence, snapping me out of my thoughts. I flinched, my hand hovering over the receiver for a moment before I picked it up. This is Hayes, I said, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. Nathan Hayes. The voice on the other end was calm, deliberate, and unmistakably authoritative. This is Victor Bennett. I straightened in my chair instinctively, gripping the phone tighter. Mr. Bennett, I replied, forcing a professional tone. What can I do for you? There was a pause, just long enough to feel deliberate. I'm calling to check on the farm's operations. I trust everything is running smoothly? Yes, sir, I said. All systems are functioning within normal parameters. Output levels are stable. Good, Bennett said, though there was no trace of approval in his voice. And the staff, have you noticed anything unusual? The question hung in the air. I hesitated, my mind flashing back to Mike's blank stare, Sarah's mechanical typing, the silent workers on the loading bay. My instinct screamed at me to tread carefully. Nothing out of the ordinary, I said finally, keeping my tone neutral. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the faint crackle of the line, the sound of Bennett's measured breathing. I see, he said, his voice colder now. I trust you understand the importance of discretion, Mr. Hayes. Of course, I replied quickly. I take my responsibilities here very seriously. Good, he said again, though the word felt more like a warning than reassurance. You've been here a week now. I assume you've had time to familiarize yourself with the farm's operations. Yes, sir. And yet, Bennett continued, his tone sharpening, you've made no inquiries about Project Aegis. My chest tightened. I was under the impression that Project Aegis was outside my scope of responsibility. It is, Bennett said, his voice now as sharp as a razor, and it would be wise to remember that. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over me like a heavy blanket. Understood. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, so long that I began to wonder if he was still there. Then finally he spoke again. Do your job, Mr. Hayes. Nothing more, nothing less. The line went dead before I could respond. I set the receiver down slowly, my hand trembling slightly. Bennett's words echoed in my mind. He hadn't said it outright, but the message was clear. Stay in line or face the consequences. But what consequences? And why did he care so much about what I did or didn't know about Project Aegis? I turned back to my monitor, the screen still displaying the same unremarkable data as before, but the numbers no longer felt benign. They felt like a distraction, a smokescreen designed to keep me from seeing the truth. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair, my thoughts racing now, piecing together fragments of information that refused to form a clear picture. Diana's warning, the unmarked trucks, the lifeless staff, Bennett's call. It all pointed to something far bigger than a wind farm. I opened a new browser window and began searching through the facility's financial records. The files were surprisingly easy to access, almost as if no one had expected anyone to look. The deeper I dug, the more questions emerged. Every expense, every piece of equipment, every salary, it was all funded directly by the government. There were no private investors, no oversight committees, and no audits. Just a steady stream of money flowing in from a faceless bureaucracy. And then there were the discrepancies. Large sums were allocated to special projects, with no explanation of what those projects entailed. Payments marked as confidential or restricted. Entire sections of the budget were redacted, leaving only blacked-out lines where details should have been. My pulse quickened as I scrolled through the files, each new discovery adding to the growing sense of unease. This wasn't just a wind farm, it was something else entirely, something the government didn't want anyone to know about. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. The numbers blurred before my eyes, replaced by a single chilling thought. What the hell is going on here? The faint hum of the machinery outside seemed louder now, as if the facility itself was alive, watching me, waiting. I glanced around the office, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, but I was alone. For now. I closed the browser and shut down the computer, the screen going dark with a soft click. My reflection stared back at me. Bennett's voice played in my mind once more. Do your job. Nothing more, nothing less. But I couldn't stop now, not when I was this close to uncovering the truth. Whatever was happening here, whatever Project Aegis was, I needed to. But I couldn't stop now, not when I was this close to uncovering the truth. Whatever was happening here, whatever Project Aegis was, I needed to know. I pushed away from the desk, the image of the blank screen still vivid in my mind. Nothing more, nothing less. I thought to myself. I spent the next few hours preparing myself for what was to come. I snuck into the supply closet, borrowed a high-visibility vest, and completed a clipboard with all the necessary information. By the time I was finished, it was almost dawn. There was no turning back now. On my way to Project Aegis, my heart raced with anticipation and anxiety. Would I be caught, or would I find out what was really happening? When I arrived at the site, I held the clipboard tightly in my hands as I stood in front of the gate. The high-visibility vest felt stiff against my shirt, and the lights above me hummed like angry bees. I had put considerable effort into making everything appear legitimate, even going so far as to create a fake maintenance report with Bennett's name on it, hoping that would suffice. If this didn't work, I thought, then I was truly screwed. The guard at the gate looked at me with a face that resembled granite. He was tall and sturdy, with a dark uniform that appeared freshly pressed. For one brief second as I approached him, I considered turning around and getting the hell out of there, but it was too late for that now. "Maintenance check for the transmission array," I said, holding up the clipboard. "Directive from Mr. Bennett." The guard looked at the clipboard, then back at me. "Transmission array's fine. No work orders." I nodded. "That's because this isn't a standard work order. Bennett wants a preemptive inspection. Something about potential fluctuations affecting Project Aegis." At the mention of Project Aegis, the guard's demeanor changed slightly. He looked at the clipboard again as if searching for something. He told me to wait a minute and return to the booth. I heard him pick up a phone and speak into it, but I couldn't make out the words. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying not to panic. When he came back, he handed me the clipboard again and pressed a button on the side of the gate. It opened with a loud noise and a dark corridor was revealed. "Don't stray off," he said. "Stick to the path." "Got it?" I said and stepped through the gate as it slammed shut behind me. The corridor on the other side was cold and dark. It was lit by bare light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, and the sound of machinery could be heard all around. I walked down the corridor at a brisk pace. Eventually, I reached a large open area. This was where all the machinery was. The bunker was enormous, with high ceilings and catwalks strung up near the top. The walls were lined with metal panels, and the floor was a maze of pipes and cables. And then I saw them, body bags. Black ones. They were being loaded into vans by individuals in military-style uniforms. I forced myself to continue moving. I descended a set of stairs, and a person in a lab coat looked at the clipboard in my hands, then nodded at me and pointed to a control terminal. "Over there," they gestured toward a nearby terminal, "and make it quick." I nodded and walked over to it, pretending to examine the display and the buttons as if I were actually taking time to input commands. From this angle, I could see most of the interior of the room. There were numerous chairs, and every one of them had a person strapped into it. They all wore helmets that covered their eyes and ears, and wires connected them to several machines along the walls. I wasn't sure if they were conscious or not. They were all breathing but otherwise completely motionless. Oh God, I thought. They're not just powering this farm, they're powering something else somewhere else. And I bet it's that nearby site. "Everything all right over here?" Someone in the same outfit as the other one asked, standing a short distance away. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. He nodded. I turned back to the terminal and made a show of pretending to make one more note on the clipboard before stepping away. "Thanks," I said, trying to sound as calm as possible. "I'll file the report with Bennett." He didn't answer, and I could feel his eyes on me as I walked back toward the stairs. Climbing back up, I thought about the body bags, the people in chairs, the machines. This wasn't just a wind farm at all. It was something else entirely. When I reached the metal doors and they opened for me, I felt relieved. It took a long time to reach the elevator and go back up to the surface. I walked to my office, passing by the machinery which was still humming away, and sat down at my desk. I turned on the computer and looked at the personnel logs. Outside, the machinery continued to work. I took a deep breath and began looking at the logs, trying to figure out what was going on with the staff. The machinery hummed outside my office, a constant noise that filled the air with an electric buzz. I sat at my desk and looked at the logs on my computer screen. After examining them for a while, I began to notice a pattern. The logs were detailed, listing names, shifts, and assignments for each worker, but there was something else as well, something that stood out. The names were listed in a kind of rotation. Each worker was assigned to a specific round. It wasn't explained anywhere what this meant, but it seemed to imply that there were multiple rounds and that each worker was moving closer and closer to something with each round. I looked at the table more closely. The last column said status. Most of them said active, but further down I saw some that said transferred, unavailable, and deceased. Diana Winter's name was there and it said deceased. And next to that, it said replacement requested. I blinked. Deceased? But she had retired, hadn't she? Or was that just a rumor? Now I wasn't so sure. Did she know this would happen to her, to all of them? I continued reading. This was a pattern. Everyone on this list was working in the same way, moving to the next round until they were finished, and then they were replaced. I reached the bottom of the log. My name wasn't on the list. I looked back at the list. My name wasn't on it, not under active or inactive or any other status. I wasn't on the list at all. Why not? Was someone deliberately excluding me? And if so, for what purpose? I rubbed my temples trying to think. No, this was no mistake. Someone had deliberately kept me off the list, kept me out of whatever was going on here. But why? To protect me or to keep me in the dark? I looked back at the screen. There was a woman named Sarah Blackwood who was being transported to Project Aegis later today. Her name was highlighted and it said pending next to it. I gritted my teeth. I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. If I wanted answers, I needed to see Project Aegis for myself, and there was only one way to do that. I went to the transport schedule and found Sarah's name on the list. Without thinking too much about it, I deleted it and typed in my own name, Nathan Hayes. All I did was change a name on a list. One simple name, and suddenly I was scheduled to be transported to Project Aegis. I leaned back in my chair and sighed. There was no way out of it now. I was going to have to go to Project Aegis and find out what the hell was really going on down there. It wasn't just a wind farm, I knew that much. It was something much more sinister, and if I didn't do this now, I might never get another chance. The humming of the machinery outside seemed to agree with me, as if it were a constant reminder of the urgency of the situation. I closed out of the personnel logs and shut down my computer, staring at my reflection in the blank screen for a few moments before getting up and leaving the room. I stood up, grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair and put it on. I remembered that I had put my ID badge in my pocket and felt it with my fingers. When I left the office, I walked down a quiet corridor. The only sound was the low hum of the machinery at the farm. I walked slowly. The transport to Project Aegis was scheduled for tomorrow night. Until then, all I could do was wait and prepare myself. Whatever was waiting for me on the other side of that gate, I needed to be ready for it. For Sarah. For Diana. For all of them. I was going to find out the truth. It was nighttime when I walked down the path toward the area where the transport truck was waiting. I kept my head down and my feet moving, trying to figure a way out. When I got to the truck, I showed them the modified list. There was no way out now. The engine came to life and we drove off into the night. At Project Aegis, the truck's engine roared to life, a low rumble that vibrated through the floor beneath my feet. I sat on a bench inside, clutching a clipboard and scribbling notes. The high-visibility vest sat uncomfortably on my shoulders, pinching at my neck. Everyone else sat around me in silence. I wasn't like them. Not yet. It had all happened so quickly. They had checked the name on the list. I had waited in my office and then I had gotten into the truck with the rest of them. Now it was quiet inside the truck. I sat down across from Lisa. "Didn't think I'd see you on this ride," she said, lowering her voice so the others couldn't hear. I looked at the others, but they didn't seem to respond to that. I tried to act like it didn't bother me. "Guess I got reassigned." She smiled. "That's one way to put it. What's that supposed to mean?" She leaned forward. "You don't belong here, Hayes. You're not on the list." "How do you know that?" She leaned in closer. "You're not the first and you won't be the last. But it never ends well." I gulped, feeling a sense of dread creeping up my spine. "What happens to them?" She took a moment to respond as if she was sizing me up. "You really don't know, do you?" "That's why I'm here," I said, "to find out." She laughed, but it was a short, humorless sound. "You're in over your head, Hayes. You should have stayed in your office." The truck stopped abruptly and all three of them stood up at the same time. I hesitated, then Lisa looked at me. She paused and added, "Whatever you do, don't stand out." The doors at the back of the truck opened, and we stepped out into a cold courtyard. I saw more individuals in black uniforms, all wearing helmets to conceal their faces. In front of us was a large building with no windows. There was one door, guarded by two more individuals with rifles. They didn't tell us where we were going, just that we needed to follow. The corridor was cold and had a strange smell. At the end of the corridor, there was a person in a lab coat standing next to a table. They were holding a tray with several small vials filled with a blue glowing liquid. "Drink," they ordered. They all took a vial and drank it. "Keep moving," I heard Lisa say. I took a vial as well. It looked almost sparkling when I held it up to the light. "Drink," they said. I hesitated. They held up the vial, the soft light inside it reflecting in their eyes. I knew I had to do it. I held the vial up to my mouth. The odor was pungent, like ammonia but sweeter. I let a drop of it fall onto my tongue. It stung. I coughed and nearly choked, then lowered the vial. No one seemed to notice. "Drink," they said again. I heard another person moaning somewhere inside the building. "Move along," one of the guards said, pushing me forward. I almost dropped the vial, trying to keep up with the others as they led me down another corridor. This one had doors on either side, all of them closed. I could still hear the moaning, but now there were other sounds too, whispers, groans, and the faint hum of machinery. At the end of the corridor, someone was waiting for us. "Diana," I whispered. She turned around slowly. Her face was pale and her eyes blue and dull, but it was her voice that terrified me. "Nathan," she said as if two voices were speaking at the same time, "you shouldn't have come." I took a step back. What happened to you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out a trembling hand, her fingers thin and claw-like. "It's too late," she said, her voice cracking. The others filed past her without so much as a glance. I stood there, staring at the hollow shell of the woman I'd once known. I repeated the word. For a second, I thought I saw something in her eyes, something that wasn't just the vacant look of the others. She whispered, "Run. Before it takes you too." Before I could say anything, one of the guards grabbed me and began pulling me away. The last thing I saw was Diana's face. I stumbled as the guard dragged me along, but my mind was already racing, trying to think of a way out. Then the alarms went off. A loud, shrill sound echoed through the halls, followed by red lights flashing everywhere. The guard stopped for a moment, looked at one of the speakers on the wall, and then continued dragging me forward. I pulled away from him, pushing him hard, and he stumbled backward, trying to reach for his weapon, but I was already running, racing down the corridor as fast as I could. I could hear the guard yelling behind me, but I didn't stop to look back. "Stop him!" someone else shouted, but I still didn't look back. The corridor was disorienting. It turned left and right, up and down. Every time I turned a corner, it felt like I was taking a huge risk. The air was getting colder, and I could hear something beneath the alarms now. It was a deep rumbling sound. The floor shook slightly beneath my feet with each step I took. The earth was growling, its deep sounds resonating through the halls. I stopped for a second at a junction. Should I go left or right? I didn't make up my mind quickly enough. I heard them coming from both directions, their boots hitting the ground in unison. I turned left and ran. The further down I went, the hotter it got. I could feel the steam coming from the pipes above me, releasing bursts of hot air that made my skin sizzle. The ground shook beneath me just as it did whenever the alarms went off, but this time it was different. There was something else mixed into the vibrations now. A faint crackling sound came from below me. It was hard to hear, but it was definitely there. Something was moving down in the depths of this earth, and whatever it was massive. I forced myself to ignore it and kept running. The room was large and tall, with catwalks crisscrossing above. There was some kind of machinery all around, and in the middle of the room, there was a tank filled with a glowing liquid. Something in it was moving, squirming, as if it was in pain or trying to escape. I didn't want to know what it was. I heard someone yell behind me, and then there was a shot fired. The bullet hit the floor next to me, and I ducked behind some crates. They were coming for me. I needed to get out of here. I looked around for an exit. There was a ladder leading up to one of the catwalks on the far side of the room. It looked like my only option. I waited until they were distracted and then ran from where I was hiding to where the ladder was, taking cover behind the crates along the way. I heard another shot fired at me but didn't stop to look where it came from. I reached the ladder and began climbing it, my hands slipping on the rungs. "Up there!" someone yelled, and I heard the guards climbing up after me. I reached the catwalk and ran over to the other side. The tank started to shake, and then it cracked as whatever was inside it roared like a beast. The entire earth trembled. I almost fell over. There were explosions further inside the facility, and smoke and fire came rushing out of the tunnels. The alarms became even more unbearable. The catwalk ended at another corridor, and I ran into it. The crackling sound was even more pronounced now, and I could hear a gurgling sound as well. Whatever was in that tank was awake, and it was furious. I ran through another set of doors and up a flight of stairs. I could see moonlight. She turned around slowly. There was something different about her. Her eyes were distant, clouded, as if she were looking at something far beyond me. "Nathan," she said, her voice hollow. "You shouldn't be here." I took a step closer. "Sarah, what happened? What's going on?" She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "You went to Project Aegis." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "I saw what they're doing there. I need to know what's happening." She smiled, but it wasn't Sarah's smile. It was cold, mechanical. "The hollow sky is awakening." "The hollow sky? What is that?" She walked toward me, her movements stiff and unnatural. "We've been preparing for this moment for years. Everything we've done, the farm, the energy, the generators, it's all been leading to this." I backed away, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Preparing for what?" "The arrival," she said. "They're coming through the hollow sky." I shook my head. "Who's coming? What are you talking about?" She reached out and touched my face, her fingers cold against my skin. You've seen them, Nathan. In the tanks. In the depths. They're just the beginning. I grabbed her wrist, pushing her hand away. Sarah, listen to me. Something's wrong with you. Whatever they did to you, we can fix it. She laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the corridor. Fix it? There's nothing to fix. This is evolution, Nathan. The next step. The lights flickered, and I heard a low rumble from somewhere deep beneath the farm. The ground trembled, just as it had at Project Aegis. It's starting, Sarah whispered, her eyes widening. They're coming through. I grabbed her shoulders. Sarah, we need to get out of here. The whole place is going to collapse. She shook her head, still smiling that cold, empty smile. I'm not leaving. None of us are. We're needed for the transition. Transition? What transition? The merging, she said, between their world and ours. The rumbling grew louder and the lights flickered again. I could hear alarms blaring from somewhere in the facility. Sarah, please, I begged. Come with me. She placed her hand on my chest, directly over my heart. You should have drunk the liquid, Nathan. It would have been easier. I pushed her away and turned to run, but she caught my arm with surprising strength. You can't stop it, she said. None of us can. It's already begun. I pulled away from her grasp and ran back the way I had come. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before me, the exit always just out of reach. Behind me, I could hear Sarah's footsteps, unnaturally steady despite the trembling ground. Nathan, she called. Don't fight it. Join us. I burst through the doors into the main control room. The screens were all flashing with warnings, the numbers and graphs fluctuating wildly. The wind farm was producing more energy than ever before, all of it being channeled downward into the earth. And then I saw it, a map of the facility with Project Aegis at its center. But it wasn't just a facility. It was a gateway, a massive structure built around something that the map labeled as the Hollow Sky. The ground shook violently, and I had to brace myself against the control panel to stay upright. Through the windows, I could see the turbines spinning faster than I'd ever seen before, their blades a blur against the night sky. Nathan. I turned to find Diana standing in the doorway, her eyes now glowing with an eerie blue light, the same color as the liquid from Project Aegis. Diana? I whispered. I thought you were dead? She smiled, the expression grotesque on her transformed face. In a way I am, but also more alive than ever before. She stepped aside, revealing Sarah and several other staff members behind her. All of them had the same glowing blue eyes, the same cold, empty expressions. Join us, Nathan, Diana said, extending her hand. Be part of the new world. I backed away, feeling the control panel pressing against my back. What have you done to these people? We've freed them, Diana said. From the limitations of their minds, their bodies, their very existence. You've turned them into puppets, I spat. No, she said. Vessels. Conduits for something greater. The rumbling grew louder and the entire building shook. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling. It's too late to stop it, Diana said. The hollow sky is opening. I looked around desperately for an escape route. The windows were too small and the doors were blocked by Diana and the others. My only option was the emergency exit at the back of the control room. I'm sorry, I said and lunged for the fire alarm on the wall. The shriek of the alarm pierced the air, momentarily disorienting Diana and the others. I used that moment to dash past them, heading for the emergency exit. "Stop him!" Diana shouted, but her voice was drowned out by the alarm and the increasingly violent rumbling of the earth. I burst through the emergency exit and found myself on a narrow catwalk that ran along the outside of the building. The wind was fierce, whipping my hair and clothes as I ran along the metal walkway. Below me, the ground was splitting open, revealing a pulsing blue light that seemed to come from the very center of the earth. The turbines were spinning faster than ever, their energy feeding into the growing chasm. I reached the end of the catwalk and descended a flight of metal stairs, my feet clanging loudly on each step. When I reached the bottom, I sprinted across the field toward my car, the ground becoming increasingly unstable beneath my feet. Just as I reached the car, a massive explosion rocked the farm. I turned to see the control building collapsing in on itself, blue light erupting from its ruins. And then, rising from the wreckage, were figures, not human, not anything I'd ever seen before. They were tall, translucent, with elongated limbs that seemed to move in ways that defied physics. Their faces, if they had faces, were hidden behind a shimmering veil of blue light. They were coming through the hollow sky. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking as I unlocked the car door. As I slid behind the wheel, I saw Diana and the others walking toward the creatures, their arms outstretched in welcome. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, backing away from the farm as fast as I could. In my rearview mirror, I watched as the creatures reached out to touch Diana and the others, their translucent forms seeming to merge with the humans. I turned the car around and sped away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do next. All I knew was that I had to get as far away from Blackridge Wind Farm as possible. As I drove through the night, the sky behind me lit up with an eerie blue glow. I could feel the earth trembling beneath the car, and I knew that whatever had been awakened at Project Aegis was spreading. The hollow sky had opened and something had come through. Something that was changing everything, the earth, the people, reality itself. I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time, watching as the blue light expanded, consuming the horizon. Then I focused on the road ahead, pressing the accelerator to the floor. Whatever was happening, I had to find a way to stop it. Or at least warn others before it was too late. The hollow sky was awakening, and the world as we knew it was coming to an end. I just hoped I wasn't the only one left to see it. 6 months later. The motel room was small and dingy, with peeling wallpaper and a bed that creaked with every movement. But it was anonymous, and that was all that mattered now. I sat at the rickety desk, staring at the map spread out before me. Red pins marked the locations where the blue light had been spotted: Blackridge Wind Farm, Project Aegis, and now, increasingly, cities and towns across the country. They were spreading just as I'd feared. The creatures from the hollow sky were using humans as vessels, transforming them into something else entirely. And with each new vessel, their influence grew stronger. I'd spent the past 6 months on the run, gathering information, trying to understand what was happening. I'd connected with others who had seen the blue light, who had witnessed the transformation of loved ones. Together, we'd formed a network, sharing information and resources, trying to find a way to stop the spread. But it was getting harder. The creatures were learning, adapting. They were infiltrating governments, media, corporations, anywhere they could gain influence and power. And they were looking for me. The man who had escaped from Project Aegis, who knew too much. A knock at the door made me jump. I reached for the gun on the desk, my heart racing. "Nathan?" a voice called softly. "It's me." I relaxed slightly, recognizing the voice of my only ally in this fight, Lisa Chin, the woman who had warned me at Blackridge Farm. I opened the door and she slipped inside, her face pale and drawn. She'd been on the run as long as I had, ever since she'd helped me escape from the farm. "Did you get it?" I asked. She nodded, pulling a small device from her pocket. "It wasn't easy, but I managed to hack into their system. This contains all the data on the Hollow Sky project. Everything they knew, everything they were planning." I took the device, turning it over in my hands. "This could be what we need to expose them." Lisa sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through her short, dark hair. "Expose them to who, Nathan? They're everywhere now. Who knows how many people in power are already under their influence?" She was right. We'd seen the signs: politicians with strange new policies, CEOs making decisions that seemed to benefit no one but the creatures, media personalities spreading subtle messages that seemed designed to prepare the public for something. "We have to try," I said. "We have to find someone who'll listen." Lisa's eyes met mine and I saw the fear there, the exhaustion. "And if we can't?" I didn't have an answer for that. Instead, I turned back to the map, studying the pattern of red pins. There had to be a pattern, a way to predict where they would strike next. "What about the others?" I asked. "Any word?" Lisa shook her head. "Nothing from Group 3 since last week. Group 1 is still holed up in the mountains trying to develop a way to detect the creatures. Group 2. She trailed off. "What about Group 2? I pressed. "They were compromised," she said quietly. "All of them. They're vessels now." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of yet another loss. We were losing this fight, one group at a time. "We need to move," Lisa said, standing up. "We've been here too long already." I nodded, gathering the map and the device. "Where to next?" "I found a place," she said. "An old bunker off the grid. We can regroup there, analyze the data, make a new plan." As we packed our meager belongings, I couldn't help but wonder if we were just delaying the inevitable. The Hollow Sky was open and the creatures were here. How long before they transformed the entire world? We left the motel room, stepping out into the cool night air. The sky was clear, the stars bright above us. For a moment, it was almost possible to believe that everything was normal, that the world wasn't being quietly invaded by creatures from another dimension. But then I looked at Lisa, saw the determined set of her jaw, the vigilant scan of her eyes as she checked our surroundings. And I knew that nothing would ever be normal again. We got into the car and I started the engine. As we pulled away from the motel, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the blue light growing on the horizon. But there was only darkness behind us. For now. The battle against the Hollow Sky was just beginning, and I wasn't sure we could win. But as long as there were people like Lisa and me, people who knew the truth, who were willing to fight, there was hope. And in this new world, hope was the most powerful weapon we had. I drove into the night, leaving another temporary shelter behind. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and possibly defeat. But also, perhaps, a chance to save what remained of humanity. The Hollow Sky had opened and something had come through. Now it was up to us to close it again before it was too late. The end.